Most women believe the problem in their relationship is communication. If I explain it better, he'll understand. If I stay calm, he'll finally listen. If I don't react emotionally, things will change. But here's the truth most women realize far too late. He understood you the whole time. He just didn't benefit from changing. A lot of men don't ignore your needs because they're confused. They ignore them because it works. Every time you explain disrespect instead of confronting it, the system continues. Every time you soften your boundaries so the relationship stays peaceful, the balance of power shifts. And slowly, without even noticing it, you become the person carrying everything. You carry the emotional responsibility. You carry the difficult conversations. You carry the repair after every argument. You carry the weight of keeping the relationship alive. And the strange part, the moment you stop doing that, everything suddenly becomes a problem. Suddenly you're too sensitive. Suddenly you're starting drama. Suddenly you're never satisfied. But think about that for a second. If your standards only become a problem the moment you enforce them, were they ever really the problem? Or was the relationship built around you tolerating less than you deserved? There's a pattern that appears in thousands of relationships. At the beginning, effort is high, attention is high, respect is high. But over time, something changes. Not because love disappears, because comfort grows. And comfort without accountability creates a very specific dynamic. He learns what you will tolerate. He learns how little effort is required to keep you. And most importantly, he learns what happens when he gives less. If nothing happens, the behavior continues. If you complain but stay, the behavior continues. If you explain, forgive, and reset the relationship every time, the behavior continues. And this is how years pass, not because of one big betrayal, but because of hundreds of small ones. The ignored messages, the broken promises, the subtle disrespect, the conversations where your feelings somehow become the problem. And eventually something shifts inside you. You stop asking, why is he acting like this? And you start asking a different question. Why did I tolerate this for so long? That's the moment everything changes. Because once that question appears, you can't go back to not seeing the pattern. And that's where the real shift begins. When a woman stops carrying the entire relationship alone, the dynamic changes immediately. She stops over-explaining. She stops minimizing her own feelings. She stops translating disrespect into excuses. And suddenly the same behavior that existed for years becomes a problem. You've changed. You used to be easier to talk to. You used to be more understanding. But what those words often really mean is this. You used to tolerate more. You used to accept less. And the moment you stop doing that, the entire system that benefited him begins to break. Now here's the part most people don't talk about. Some men grow when this happens. They realize the dynamic changed and they take responsibility. But some men don't, because growth requires accountability, and accountability requires effort, and effort is uncomfortable. So instead of changing, they try something else. They try to convince you that your standards are the problem. You're asking for too much. You're being dramatic. You're overthinking everything. But notice the pattern. You only become too much the moment you stop accepting too little. And once you see that clearly, something inside you shifts. The confusion disappears. The constant self-doubt fades. And suddenly the question is no longer, how do I fix this relationship? The question becomes, why would I stay in a system designed to keep me smaller? That's the moment many women describe as waking up. Not becoming angry, not becoming bitter, just finally seeing clearly. And clarity changes everything. Because once you see the pattern, you can't pretend it isn't there anymore. And when that happens, the relationship either grows or it ends. But the old version of you, the one who carried everything quietly, never comes back. And that's when the real power shift happens. Not when you fight harder, not when you explain more, but when you stop negotiating with behavior that never should have been acceptable in the first place. Now I want to ask you something. When was the moment you realized you were the only one adjusting in your relationship? Was it one specific event, or was it years of slowly swallowing things that didn't feel right? Right? I see it in the comments if you've ever felt that shift. And if this pattern feels familiar, watch the next episode on the channel, because in the next video, we're going to talk about something even deeper. Why some men only change when they feel you leaving, and what that actually says about the relationship. And here is the part many women don't see at first. When the dynamic finally becomes clear, the hardest realization isn't about him, it's about you. Not because you are weak, not because you are naive, but because you were trained to keep the relationship working, no matter what it cost you. Most women are taught something very specific growing up. Be patient, be understanding, don't overreact, don't make things worse. So when something feels wrong in a relationship, the first instinct is not to confront it. The first instinct is to fix it, to explain more clearly, to be more patient, to give the other person more time to understand. And for a while, that feels like love. But slowly, something changes. Because the more responsibility you take for fixing everything, the less responsibility the other person needs to take at all. And that's how the imbalance grows. Not overnight, but over months, over years, one small compromise at a time. You let something slide because you don't want to start a fight. You forgive something because you believe everyone makes mistakes. You explain something again because you believe communication solves everything. And each of those moments feels small, insignificant, but together they build a pattern where one person is constantly adjusting and the other person doesn't have to. That's why the real turning point in many relationships is not anger, it's clarity. The moment a woman stops trying to make sense of behavior that never made sense in the first place. The moment she stops asking herself, maybe I'm expecting too much, and starts asking something else. Why am I the only one trying this hard? That question changes everything. Because once you ask it honestly, the answers start appearing everywhere. In the conversations that go nowhere, in the promises that never become actions, in the apologies that sound sincere but change nothing. And suddenly the entire relationship looks different. Not because anything new happened, but because you finally stopped explaining the pattern away. And once that clarity appears, the old dynamic becomes impossible to maintain. You no longer rush to repair every conflict. You no longer carry the emotional labor alone. You no longer protect the relationship at the cost of yourself. And this is where many relationships reach their real test. Because when the old system stops working, the other person has two choices. They can step up or they can resist. Some men recognize the shift and grow. They realize that the relationship only survived for so long because you carried it, and they finally start carrying their part. But others react differently. They push back, they blame, they accuse. Because the moment accountability appears, the comfort disappears. And comfort was the thing they valued most. So they try to pull you back into the old dynamic, back into explaining, back into apologizing, back into carrying everything quietly again. But once you've seen the pattern clearly, going back becomes almost impossible, because now you understand something you didn't see before. You were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person. And that realization is where real change begins. Not the kind where you argue harder, not the kind where you prove your point better, but the kind where you finally decide what kind of relationship you are willing to live in. Because a healthy relationship doesn't require one person to carry it alone. It doesn't require constant explanations for basic respect. And it doesn't collapse the moment one person stops tolerating less than they deserve. Real relationships grow when both people show up, when both people adjust, when both people take responsibility. And if that balance never existed, then the problem was never your communication. The problem was the system itself. And once you see that clearly, something inside you changes permanently. You stop trying to save something that only survives when you shrink yourself. And that's the moment where a woman stops asking, how do I make this relationship work? And starts asking a much more powerful question. What kind of relationship do I actually deserve? If this realization feels familiar to you, write "I see it" in the comments. Because recognizing the pattern is where everything starts to change. And in the next episode, we're going to talk about something even deeper. why some men suddenly change the moment they feel you pulling away, and why that reaction reveals more about the relationship than most people realize.